I'm back. And we're ready to take on verse 9 of First Peter 3. You remember, I've spent a long time on it, but verse 8 offers five behaviors and attitudes, qualities of life that will enrich and nurture and bring vitality to any human relationship. Then in verse 9, he has a negative. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. Our world, our basic culture that we live within kind of promotes that you hurt people who hurt you. You get back at them. The word for this is revenge. I kind of enjoy action movies. Most of the action movies that I have ever watched, one of the dominant themes in those movies is revenge. It's getting back at somebody for whatever they have done. Our system that we seem to default to is a system of revenge. Marriages that I work with, the conflicted marriages that I work with, really, I can't think of a single exception to this, are trying to get back. Both of them are trying to get back at each other. And it doesn't, by the time they come to me, usually they're about 6 weeks too late coming in. But by the time they come in, it almost doesn't even matter who started this, because by now you're in this cycle of hurt, be hurt, hurt, be hurt, hurt, be hurt. It spins like a flywheel of negative energy. The world, and the world that Peter lived in, in this regard, was no different than the world we live in. We have this predisposition for revenge. And until revenge is pulled off the table of options in our relationships, we can't model God's design for them. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. Now, when I was younger, I was kind of the king of the cold cut. I actually even, I'm kind of it's humorous but shameful that I actually had a book of cold cuts and insults. And I would page through it, and when it was, I would harvest those for when they would be appropriate. And what Peter is saying is, it's never appropriate to insult when you're insulted. But there's something in me, I bet it's in you too, that just wells up when I'm insulted. I want to, does this ever happen to you? The insult happens, whatever is said or done, and 2 hours later, in a whole different context, you think of the perfect comeback. It happens for a lot of us. And as frustrating as it might be, it's actually kind of a blessing from God. Now, instead of evil for evil, hurt for hurt, insult for insult, he says, on the contrary, repay evil with blessing. So somebody steals my golf clubs out of the trunk of my car when it's in the driveway. That feels evil to me. And so what I'm supposed to do is repay them with blessing? How does that work? Well, it requires that we're not just cruising on our own energy and resources. Really, only the Holy Spirit, only God's Spirit working in us can pull this thing off. There's an interesting story in the life of David that I kind of think applies here. When Solomon, before Solomon became king, toward the close of David's reign, one of his sons, Absalom, decided he wanted to be king, and so the whole big story is very amazing. He kind of laid back in the weeds and set himself up to be viewed as a benevolent hero of the kingdom. And then he popped the cork and he did a coup. David was fleeing for his life from Jerusalem because Absalom had marshaled his followers and had captured Jerusalem, or was in the process. David was fleeing, and as he fled, a guy began to call down curses on him from up on the hills through the valley that David was escaping through. His name was Shimei. He cursed David. He threw rocks at him. He kicked dirt out on him. Well, Joab, David's first commander of the army, said, "I'll take care of that dog. I will slay him, and it won't take me more than one slice." David said, "No, leave him alone. What if God sent him to rebuke me? What if this is God's message to me?" Holy smokes. That I can hardly imagine. I'm fleeing for my life. Imagine the tension and the emotional stress and the upheaval I would have been feeling as I'm fleeing. Just that. And then this Yehu kicking off rocks at me, throwing rocks at me, cursing me, accusing me of things that I didn't really do. And David says, "No, leave him alone. Maybe God sent him. And if God sent him, we're not to do anything." That is very noble. Well, the story continues, and Absalom is killed in battle. David mourns deeply for him, very nearly loses his troops as he's mourning. And finally, he is ready to come back to Jerusalem and resume his throne. Well, guess what? Shimei, he was, golly, the guy was crazy, but he wasn't stupid. And he asks for an audience with King David. And basically he grovels and says, I have no recourse. I don't have an excuse. Will the king please forgive me? And David said, "I will permit you to live, but you must not leave Jerusalem, because if you do, then you will be killed." Well, I mean, that seems a little harsh, but really, when you consider he probably should have been shortened by a head, it's not nearly as awful as it could have been for Shimei. Fast forward, David is on his deathbed, and he calls Solomon in and gives him kind of a grocery list of things that he desires after he dies. And some of them are very good things, like the construction of the temple and the security of the nation. But there is this one other thing. He says, "Don't forget Shimei and bring his head down to the grave in blood," meaning give him a violent death. What looked initially like a very merciful and noble response to an unjust kind of evil, by the end of David's life, was really vengeful. Not sure what to make of that, except that it tells the story of some of my life as well. Now, I haven't ever had anybody put a contract out on anybody to have them killed, but there are times when I held my tongue. I didn't curse the one who cursed me. I didn't insult the one who insulted me. I didn't give evil for evil. but it kind of ate at me. And I didn't have the same kind of context or power that David did, but I think I had the same kind of rotten response. I don't even know what to call it, to the way I had been hurt and insulted, the evil that had been perpetrated against me. Peter says, do not repay evil for evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, that's a big deal. This is not just another alternative. No. The contrary means in the opposite way, repay evil with blessing. Blessing begins in my heart and mind. In order for me to bless another person, I have to value them. Now, yeah, there are all kinds of blessings, and I suppose there would be variations in the intensity and the value and the depth and all of those things. But to offer a blessing to anyone, I have to value them, and my blessing them is evidence of my value. Peter writes, repay evil with blessing. So the first step on this journey is for me to somehow focus on the value of the person instead of the pain of what they did to me. This is very difficult. In big relationships and like country toward country, nation toward nation, this would be very difficult to do. Although I will say, in the history of America, more than any other nation, we have repaid the evil of war with blessing of reparations. Well, that's not what this is about, but repay evil with blessing. I don't know how to give you a formula for this other than it begins with seeing past the behavior of the individual and doing what you can, doing your very best in partnership with God to see the value of the person. If I could see people the way God sees them, it would be a lot easier for me to give blessing for cursing and blessing for evil. Because what God sees is their brokenness and their craving for love and fulfillment, and that only He can provide that. But I don't have that kind of vision. And so I must intentionally remind myself, when evil is done to me, I must not repay evil with evil. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. And then he goes on, here's why. Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. To this you were called. In other words, God's intention for you was that you would become a channel, a vessel of His blessing. His design is for you to bless those who curse you, bless those who do evil towards you. And I know this sounds so churchy. I can't unchurchify it. We are never more fulfilled in our lives than when we build our lives according to God's design. How do you know when you've gotten back enough? How do you know when you have beaten that person enough who beat you? How do you know? Well, the other side of it is, how do you know when you blessed them enough? Of the two, the one that holds life and health is this contrary idea of repaying evil with blessing. Because to this you were called. This is how God designed you to be fulfilled, to be whole, to meet His design and specifications, if I can say it that way. And then, so that you may inherit a blessing. Everything is not a quid pro quo. Everything is not a you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back, especially not with God. We can get sucked into this idea that we obey God's design, we conform to God's commands and design so that He'll do something good for us. And that is generally what happens when I conform to His design. Something good usually happens. But, even then, there's no guarantee. Hey, Peter is not giving a guarantee that if you return a blessing for a curse, everything's going to be rainbows and unicorns, and the price of beef will go down, your golf score will go down, your contentment will go up. That's not what he's saying. But he is saying that when we live in this contrary way, our lives then will be blessed. We inherit a blessing, and not necessarily a blessing from the person we blessed, but a blessing from the one who can truly bless, God Himself. Live in a contrarian way. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.